that Jesus was the president of the United States? What would it look like if Jesus was sitting in the Oval Office as our commander-in-chief? Would it look like it does now? Is Trump close enough? I don't think so. And I don't think there's a Democratic candidate that fits the bill either. There's a children's story about a kid who wakes up and finds that there's a dragon the size of a kitten sitting on his bed. So he runs downstairs to his mom and he says, "Mom, there's a dragon in my room." She says, "Son, there's no such thing as a dragon." So he goes back up to his room, he sees the dragon still there, but he says, "There's no such thing as a dragon." And the dragon grows. And as the story progresses, the mother and son keep denying the existence of this dragon. The dragon keeps growing and growing and growing until the story culminates with the dragon filling up every bit of the house. He's so large that he stands up and takes the house down the street. And the father finally comes home to realize that, well, there's no home. And then he realizes that the house is down the street, so he runs down the street. He catches up with the mother and son. He's like, what happened? And the son's like, "It was the dragon." But the mom, of course, is like, "There's no such." The boy cuts her off and says, "There is a dragon." And at that moment, the dragon shrinks back to the size of a kitten. I believe that there is a church-sized dragon in Western Christianity. One that we need to make ourselves aware of and position ourselves to deal with. I see the dragon as this: a gospel that is more concerned about bringing some people on this planet to heaven than it is about bringing heaven to this planet. A gospel that is more concerned with getting there than we're doing here. This dragon, or this gospel, appears innocent because it brings a message of salvation. But in reality, it doesn't care about our current state. It just cares about our eternal state. We've lost sight of the true gospel, but we can take it back. And I believe that once we do, there will be an exponential revival of restoring Jesus' kingdom to this earth, and the world as a whole will flourish. And it starts with those of us who identify as Christian, to reorient ourselves towards this gospel that Jesus brought in his birth, in his life, his death, and his resurrection. So I want to speak towards the three truths of the gospel that we may be neglecting. And as we go through this, what do we remember this? The gospel is good news. So the first truth of the gospel is this: the gospel is relevant. If it's not relevant, we might need to ask the question, is it the gospel? But what does that mean? What does it mean to be relevant? It means the gospel speaks to the needs of every single person, whether they know it or not. So I was having coffee the other day with my friend Jonathan. Jonathan's a youth pastor. I'm serving under him right now, and he's leading me. But he also grew up in Malawi. And so while we're having coffee, we're kind of talking about his experience over there. And he tells me something that stuck with me. And he described the Malawians' view of the Americans that would come to their country. You see, the Americans brought salvation to the people of Malawi. And it wasn't the kind of salvation that gets you to heaven, even though that was certainly part of it. They brought food and water, medicine, and other supplies. And this was salvation to the Malawians. The Americans addressed the Malawians' needs, and that was the gospel. And that was good news. So I was deeply struck by this image. And I realized that this is what Christianity in America is missing. Our good news is missing good news. But as a first world country, we have different needs that the gospel should address. It's possible the question we should be asking in this Americanized gospel that we're living: does our gospel seek justice? You see, the stats for systemic racism, if you look them up, the stats for systemic racism in America, they're depressing. The mistreatment of those trying to cross our border is heartbreaking. And the common view that Christians in America are irrelevant and too extreme breaks my heart, because that's not who we are. I believe we've made the gospel too salvation focused. We've made it more about getting there rather than restoring here. So meanwhile, the marginalized people that we're trying to bring this gospel of eternal life to are thinking, if this is life, why would I want this forever?
Yeah.
We've got to bring the entirety of the gospel, not just certain aspects. And if we look at Jesus' life, it's evident that the gospel calls for liberation here and now. Desmond Tutu said this: I don't preach a social gospel. I preach the gospel, period. The gospel is concerned with the whole person. When people were hungry, Jesus didn't say, now is that political or social?
Come on.
He said, I feed you. Because the good news to a hungry person is bread. So the gospel is relevant, and the gospel addresses the physical needs of others. And so one of the ways we go about addressing these issues flows right into the second truth of the gospel, which is the gospel is political. When Paul wrote Jesus is Lord, he was implying that Caesar is not. Today we may say Jesus is king, the White House is not.
Come on.
And this means that Christians live under the authority of Christ's reign, not earthly establishments. But yes, this means we try to live at peace with those establishments, but it also means we go against them when things aren't right.
That's right.
See, the gospel's not Republican. The gospel's not Democrat. And the gospel is not apathetic. So I've seen it put this way: Christians should be too conservative for progressives and too progressive for conservatives. Yet we may find that progressive politics represent the gospel well in their commitment to social justice and liberating those who are suffocating under the system. And we may find also that the conservative platform better represents the Christian commitment to moral order. Yet neither party will ever represent us perfectly. Therefore, politically, we're homeless. The gospel causes us to approach politics with humility and leads us to go against oppressive structures in our government. And also to be for the good of all people. Not just the good of our country, but the good of the whole world. So, if it hasn't been realized implicitly, my final point's goal is to make it explicit. The gospel is good news to all, even if they reject Christianity. The gospel makes the world a better place for everybody. As Christians, we're called to the business of restoration and renewal. So my question is, why wouldn't anybody want Christians' influence in their society?
Yeah.
More often than not, I believe those who don't want us influence in their society have been shown a poor representation of the gospel.
Yeah.
But in reality, the gospel causes us to be for the good of all people, which means we can go out and support secular organizations that may be fighting against systemic racism or other issues of our day. And the people involved may respond with, well, I don't really care about this whole God thing, but I think it's great that you're taking a stand with us. The gospel also urges us to recognize that what's going on at our border is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And leads us to hold our government accountable for finding a better solution that is not dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Come on.
And there's countless other issues at hand that Christians should be seeking to be aware of and influencing them in the direction that promotes the intrinsic value of all involved. So at the beginning of my talk, I asked you the question, what would it look like if Jesus was president of the United States? So try to imagine again. What would it look like? I imagine it looks something like this. The poor in spirit would be blessed. The broken would be blessed. The marginalized would be lifted up. Systemic racism would be a thing of the past. And there would be what the Jewish community understood as shalom, this place of peace and justice. This is the image we should be aligning ourselves with in this cultural moment. This image is our goal. No, Jesus is not president. Jesus is king. And we are his kingdom. So I hope that I've inspired you to realize the relevance of the gospel and started a pattern of thinking around how we can work towards bringing Jesus' kingdom here instead of just trying to get there. Would this stir up a conversation, and through those conversations, we come to our own humble and cautious conclusions? Thank you.